Welcome in everybody to another episode of Clutch Scoops, a post-trade deadline recap edition of Clutch Scoops. I am Tomer Azarly, your host, NBA insider, NBA writer, whatever you want to call me. That's Brett Siegel, our resident NBA insider here at Clutch Points, done a lot of great work this week. Brett, it is over. We will be able to get a lot of rest over the next couple of days. But before we do that, we have a lot to discuss. But first, I wanted to ask you just to recap what this week has been like for you, as the rumors are flying up and down. You're getting a lot of mentions. The mentions counter is going up. Just what's this week been like?
It's been like any other trade deadline. It's to be expected. Some people like it, some people don't. That's just how it goes. And obviously, tensions are high with that Giannis situation. There's a lot of teams that were vying for him, and the Bucks, they weren't really doing anything. They were just out there seeing what value existed for their player. They're going to take that with them to the offseason. Probably got some good intel there, not even just on Giannis, but what other teams are thinking of some of their players as well. So they'll be able to use that in negotiating tactics. So we'll see what John Horst has up his sleeve. The Bucks are going to be aggressive entering the offseason to try to retool this roster around Giannis, and they're going to be going for a championship. That's the word right now. And everyone's saying that, hey, we could revisit Giannis trade talks in the summer. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think that the Bucks are going to do everything they can to try to convince Giannis between now and the NBA draft to stay in Milwaukee long term.
We have a Giannis tab. I want fans to tune into the Giannis tab. I know you got a lot to talk about Giannis. We want to hear all of it when we get there. I do want to start though with the biggest trade I would say of the day, probably the Ivica Zubac trade, the one that kind of came out of left field. Rumblings, started surfacing last night during another Clippers game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. You were hearing that teams for the longest time had been pursuing Ivica Zubac, teams that were looking for a center like the Boston Celtics, like the Indiana Pacers. But as you've reported multiple times, we've reported the Clippers' asking prices remained steadfast. They were looking for multiple first round picks there, and I think for a while there was some skepticism as to whether they would be able to get that. This morning or this afternoon rather, the Clippers were able to get that multiple first round picks in 26 and 29, and if the 26 one doesn't convey because it does have some protections, it moves to a 2031 unprotected first round pick. So before I chime in on that, Brett, just thoughts on the move and how that trade kind of came together here before the deadline.
Well, it wasn't just that they wanted multiple first round picks. They wanted specifically at least two unprotected picks. And that's something that teams weren't willing to meet until the Pacers came with their offer today. But even before that, there was the team that we reported about, someone offering a unprotected first round pick and a swap. Turns out it was the Boston Celtics. And so that goes to show that what the Celtics were trying to do before they made the move for Nikola Vucevic, who's on an expiring salary. And so the Clippers, they remained steadfast entering last night that they were not going to trade Ivica Zubac until they got that price that they officially wanted. And so the Pacers come in last minute with this deal. They offer Benedict Mathurin, who we have been reporting for a month and a half that his time was coming to an end with the Pacers and that he was very much on the trade block at this point. They were looking to get rid of him to find a center upgrade. And obviously, Jarris Walker was involved in those talks as well, but it's Isaiah Jackson who goes back to the Clippers simply because Zubac leaving, you need a center. They add a young, dynamic rim runner in Jackson who tore his Achilles last season, but he showed a lot of potential early on in his career to be a really good pick and roll finisher and play well above the rim. Next to Darius Garland, I think that he's going to be very successful there with the Clippers. And so that price tag, that's very interesting protections that they put on that 2026 first round pick because when these trade talks started developing in about the last few hours leading up to the trade deadline, we kept hearing the Pacers are going to do something, the Pacers are going to do something. We all figured it was going to be for a center. We knew that Zubac was at the top of their list. We knew that they were targeting Daniel Gafford as well. And obviously, those protections on that 2026 pick became the focal point of those trade talks with the Clippers. And so I believe it's like 50% protected in the lottery. It's like 1 through 5. It remains with the Pacers. Six to what is it, Tomer? Six to
So
10.
it's 1 through 4 protected, and then 10 to 30 protected. So if it falls between
So
five and
five,
nine,
yeah,
it is
five
it
to
is a
nine goes
Clippers
to the
pick.
Clippers.
Yeah, and then if it doesn't convey in this year, it will be 2031 completely unprotected pick. Which, again, in 5 years, who knows where the Pacers are? I mean, Siakam will
And
be
that's their unprotected pick
aging.
that they wanted.
Right, right. So the Clippers get the 29 unprotected and the 31 unprotected in a worst case scenario. So they also got a second round pick out of that, I believe. and a guy in Benedict Mathurin who has shown the ability to be a talented scorer in this league, and Isaiah Jackson, who you mentioned, has been, has had a good year coming off the ACL. I believe it was ACL or Achilles, one of those two,
It was
Achilles tear,
Achilles.
Achilles tear. So he's been really good for them, and both of those guys young, and I could see that being a part, if not of the Clippers' long-term future, could be rerouted down the line, given shorter-term deals and rerouted for potentially disgruntled stars or stars who want to come to LA in a year or two or three. So the Clippers are building something here. They definitely. Um, I mean, look, I think entering this trade deadline, I think it felt like this was going to be a relatively quiet, deadline for them. They were going to try and improve on the margins, but over the last several weeks, as the Clippers, I think it started when they were about 6-21. Harden and his camp began looking for maybe a place where he can compete for a championship, because it didn't look like it was happening here. James is also being used heavily. I mean, his usage rate was through the roof. His ISO rate was through the roof. I think he still leads the league in isolation rate by a wide margin. And so I think they began looking for potential destinations for James. And I think once that really came to fruition in the last week and a half here, that Cleveland could be a real destination for him, I think the Clippers kind of shifted a little bit of their thinking and went, okay, we should try and capitalize and maybe maximize on some of our best available players and try to build towards the future. I think Zoo now gets the opportunity to go to Indiana, contend not this year, but next year once Tyrese Halliburton comes back. They'll have Pascal Siakam, which is going to be a very, very deadly front court there in Indianapolis. And so, and then in that Eastern Conference, anything can happen. We saw it last year. So, the Clippers thinking here is, a bit of a retool here, getting some assets. They have not had any draft picks of their own or from others for quite some time due to the Paul George trade, and so now they're able to get a couple assets back. They get a first round pick, I believe, this summer as well. So you start to see some things line up here where they have the picks and the contracts available to make a big deal, Brett.
The biggest thing about this trade that I look at is they weren't going to get more value than they could have now for Zubac. That's just what it was going to be. This was his ceiling, honestly, in this type of league where teams are looking for those rim running stretch big men. Zubac is a really good player, but he doesn't play on the perimeter, and he's not necessarily known for his above the rim abilities. He's a really good defender, really good rebounder, and just a really good center all around. And so with his value being at this point to get two unprotected picks for a player of that style, not necessarily him particularly, but of that style, I think is really good sell high value for the Clippers. And obviously for a team that doesn't have many draft picks moving forward, they have a chance to immediately get a lottery pick this year. And if they don't, they have plenty of picks for the foreseeable future past that 2029-2030 season. And so that's the mindset there. You add Darius Garland to get a lot younger. But now the big question mark becomes Kawhi Leonard, Tomer. I'm not sure that Kawhi Leonard is going to be with the Clippers past this season. I think that there's going to be a lot of conversations in the offseason with him being on an expiring salary of contenders looking to trade for him. And obviously, you have to imagine that him and his camp aren't the happiest based on how this trade deadline has gone. They expect to be contending for a championship in LA. That was what he signed up for when he signed with the Clippers initially, and that just has not happened to this point. So I would keep a very close eye on what happens with Kawhi Leonard through the rest of this season and then heading into the summer.
Yeah, I mean, I will add that I think Kawhi and the Clippers have had a very collaborative relationship over the last couple of years, and since he's gotten here, they've worked together to try and put together a championship contender around him. And so I think while this deadline kind of did take a turn away from championship contention, I think the reality is they weren't contending for a championship this year, anyways. And so I think when you kind of accept that as a reality, you can start to build around the assets that you guys are able to bring back in Darius Garland and Benedict Mathurin and the three first rounders or the two first rounders and the couple second rounders they got. So, I'm sure Kawhi they will revisit or they'll have some discussions. Between when they made the Harden trade and when they made the Zubac trade. I mean, that was within 48 to 60 hours before the trade deadline. So really tough to trade your three best players in a matter of that 60 hours right there. So something I'm sure that we revisit in the offseason when they have time to see which teams can maybe even start a little bit of a bidding war. Teams that feel like they're one player away from a championship. Toronto Raptors. They've been searching for that extra piece. Who knows if that's Kawhi Leonard? I know they've been looking for a big man. We'll talk about them later, but they've left Toronto. Kawhi's left Toronto. Toronto's loved him. after that championship. And this is not a report, but you never know. I think that there definitely will be suitors for Kawhi in the offseason as an expiring contract. Um, but the Clippers, yeah, obviously move on from Ivica Zubac, move on from James Harden, build more towards the future, and we'll kind of see what they have in store there. But definitely a pivot and a shift from this past era or iteration of the franchise to prioritizing their future, getting a two-time All-Star in Darius Garland, a couple of good young players, and Isaiah Jackson and Benedict Mathurin, obviously the draft pick. So definitely a pivot, and we'll see what happens there. We have a lot more teams to discuss, though, so we will move on to Giannis Antetokounmpo. After months and months and weeks and multiple tweets, oh, that kind of rhymed, of Giannis, and his future being up in the air, um, he was not traded. And I think as we got close to the deadline, maybe as of yesterday, correct me if I'm wrong, Brett, that the signals were that Milwaukee was not going to accept the Warriors offer. The Miami Heat got the idea that they were not going to be taking their offer, and so it felt like Milwaukee was just going to stand pat and keep Giannis through the deadline. What can you kind of tell us about how that really came together over the last several hours or days?
Yeah, over the last few days, it's really become clear to all these teams that were pursuing him, the Timberwolves, the Warriors, the Heat, that the Bucks weren't really interested in moving him. And regardless of what people want to believe that their team was in the market or not, ever since about very early Monday morning, Sunday night, those were the indications coming from Milwaukee that they were not going to be moving on from Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's why the Warriors quickly pivoted. They were in discussions for Jaren Jackson Jr. They were talking about him. Then they obviously did the deal for Kristaps Porzingis when Jaren Jackson talks fell through, and they were still looking at that Giannis package. It was still on the table if the Bucks wanted it. They were just receiving signals that the Bucks weren't going to take it. The Miami Heat, they were obviously in scramble mode trying to figure out is there any way that they could make their package better because they had gotten indications that the Bucks were not going to take what they had right now, especially with Bam Adebayo not being on the table. And so they were looking around to see, hey, if we trade Andrew Wiggins, if we trade Norman Powell, can we get draft picks back? Obviously, that was not something that other teams were wanting to help them with it, and they didn't have the assets to pull off the trade. And the Miami Heat, ever since the beginning of the week, they were not in the sweepstakes for Giannis Antetokounmpo. And then obviously the Minnesota Timberwolves were in that same boat. It was just they were not able to get any assets that the Bucks would want in a trade. But the biggest thing, Tomer, is that the Bucks were never really willing to trade him. They just wanted to see what the value was out there. They wanted to see what teams were willing to give up. And like we mentioned, introducing this show, they got a really good gauge of some of these teams, the Warriors, the Timberwolves, the Heat, of how they not only view their players, but what kind of assets they're willing to give up. So now they can take that information with them into the offseason to not only bolster their roster, but hey, if Giannis does ultimately ask out, which it doesn't seem like he's ever going to do, based on the interviews that he's done, the one-on-ones with the Milwaukee Bucks reporters there, it doesn't seem like he's going to ask out. But if he does, at least they now have this information and they can take it back to teams like the Knicks, like the Cavaliers, and some of these other teams that are going to get in the mix for Giannis in the offseason and say, this is what we could have gotten for him at the trade deadline. This is what our asking price is going to be now. So that's kind of the crazy 48, 72 hour spiel of kind of what happened with Giannis going into this trade deadline. But there were never any real indications that he was going to be traded, and we reported on that multiple times at Clutch Points.
So let's look at the offseason then. When the Bucks do have the opportunity to revisit those trade talks, whether or not he actually requested trade or not, um, you, you know, are they willing to trade him in the offseason, or does it need to be in the form of a request, or will they be proactive in trying to find, a team that he wants to go to, and a team that has the assets, and maybe create a little bit of a bidding war there? What does that look like in the offseason if they were to either approach a trade?
I'm of the impression, and from talking with teams that were directly involved in these negotiations, if you want to call it negotiations with the Bucks heading into the trade deadline, just the talks about Giannis, everybody's under the impression that until he actually asks out and says, I want to be traded from Milwaukee, they're not going to trade him. And it's simply because why would you trade a generational talent, the best player in franchise history, when you're still maybe one or two pieces away? And I truly believe that if they got one or two pieces, they could be a championship contender because Giannis is that good. And it's the same thing with the Denver Nuggets. They have those one, two other pieces, and they got a lot of depth around Nikola Jokic, but he's the center of everything. Because they have Jokic, they're in championship contention. It's the same thing here with the Milwaukee Bucks. As long as Giannis is healthy and they have guys that contribute and play on both ends of the court around him, I fully believe that that team can compete for a championship. That's the mindset of the front office. That's the mindset of ownership. And that's why John Horst and that front office is going to enter the offseason very aggressive. They're going to potentially get a top five, top six, top seven pick in this year's draft. And they're going to be able to retool this roster very quickly around Giannis. That is also why we saw them do some of these minor salary moves to get second round assets, to take on contracts that people didn't want, these lesser minimum like contracts, and also get cash considerations. It's all so they can enter the offseason and have flexibility to build a championship contender around Giannis.
The Bucks obviously, we're trying to use Portis and Kyle Kuzma as their only assets, if you will. They weren't really considered assets on the market, as we've seen. The Bucks did try, to find pieces that could help build around Giannis with contracts of Bobby Portis and especially Kyle Kuzma, but were unable to. I know they inquired about John Morant with the Memphis Grizzlies, which I think we can just transition right into it. John Morant was not traded in the offseason, in by the trade deadline, and I think to the surprise of some, but it does kind of ring some bells about his value right now. The Bucks did look into trading for him. They were trying to. I believe they had some interest. The Grizzlies had some interest in Ryan Rollins, but again, I don't think the offer was exactly what Memphis wanted to get John Morant out of Memphis and bring back some talent from Milwaukee. So no trade there did materialize. Miami was in the hunt for John Morant as well for multiple days seriously there, but again, I think they really had all their eggs in the Giannis Antetokounmpo basket, and instead of making a rushing move here to try and get some talent, I think they're going to stand pat. Obviously, they did stand pat and try to wait till the offseason to try and add some talent, either via trade, via draft, whatever. They're gonna try and find some way to do it. Brett, what did you make of John Morant just not really being traded? I think that was the one guy we really had on our radar as the last big name to be moved.
It just simply came down to Zach Kleiman and Memphis not willing to sell at an all-time low price. They traded Desmond Bain this past offseason for what was it, 4 first-round picks, and then they go out and they trade Jaren Jackson Jr. for 3 first-round picks. They want to get at least one for John Morant. They recognize that his value is down. That's something that they will admit, and all of the drama that has surrounded him dating back to even previous years, not just this year with Tumas Isalo and that friction that has occurred with the coaching staff in the locker room earlier this year, but even before that with the suspensions and the injuries, everything has been boiling to a point for this marriage to be split between John Morant and the Grizzlies. That's why his value is low, but it's not at the point for the Grizzlies' perspective where Trae Young only got traded for Corey Kispert and CJ McCollum because the Hawks just wanted to get off his contract and move in a different direction. Yes, the Grizzlies are moving in a different direction. They're in a full-blown rebuild at this point, but they will not sell low on John Morant, and that's why they weren't going to take any of these offers that included second-round picks. They weren't going to just take expiring salaries for him. They want something of value coming back in return, whether that's a young talent that they can pinpoint and say that they can build their franchise around alongside Zach Edey and Cedric Coward, or first round pick. And so no team was willing to do that at the trade deadline. And so they're just going to carry this out. Whether or not he plays again this season, I fully expect him once he heals from that elbow injury to be back on the court because he wants to play. But how this plays out in the offseason, it's just another thing to add on to this drama with John Morant and the Grizzlies. It's a very messy situation and a split for a star from the franchise that drafted him.
Yeah, John Morant currently out with the UCL sprain in his left elbow. He started the season, I think, playing 12 of their first 13 or 14 games, but ever since then, simply has not been healthy. I think he had that 1 game suspension, obviously, came back and then got injured in that game. So it's been kind of the trend for Jaw. So I think, part of the reason why teams didn't trade for him is just the lack of proof that he's, one, durable, but two, just reliable as your star player. If you're going to trade any kind of asset for him, you need to make sure this guy is reliable, can be your franchise guy, and can be healthy. And so I think he hasn't proven much of either of those, to be honest with you. So I do, like you said, I do expect him to return this season from the elbow injury. I'm sure Memphis would like to prefer to tank and play their young guys, but Ja, I think, definitely has something to prove. He needs to show everyone that he's still capable of performing at a high level and helping his team to win, not just putting up empty stats. So Morant certainly has things to play for, and I think the Grizzlies, and it would be in their best interest for him to be able to play and ramp up the trade value. Because right now, as you've mentioned, there wasn't much interest out there on the market due to one reason or another. There just wasn't anything there. So I am curious to see how that plays out in Memphis.
It will be interesting to watch Memphis. Obviously, they're going to be a team that's going to continue to make moves. Kyle Anderson, he could be a potential buyout candidate here. Contavious Caldwell Pope enters the offseason with his player options. So, what do the Grizzlies potentially do there? Do they look to move him in some kind of salary dump move? So, the foundation's been set for this Grizzlies rebuild, and they're going to be very busy heading into the NBA draft. I would expect them to not only move John Morant around that time in a trade, but they're going to see what other pieces they could potentially do. Maybe they leverage future draft picks now to try to move up in this 2026 draft to get one or two guys that can escalate this rebuild because Zach Kleiman, we know he likes to be aggressive. We know the types of talent that he has picked through this draft through the years. I think that the Grizzlies have been one of the best teams when it comes to the draft and pinpointing talents that can help them right now. And obviously, with some of those younger guys, like we mentioned, Zach Edey, Cedric Coward, Jalen Wells is still there as well. Forgot to mention him earlier. And so you add maybe a Cam Boozer and some of these other guys to the draft, AJ DeBonsa at the top of the draft. If you can grab one of them, all of a sudden that escalates your rebuild to new points.
We'll see what Memphis does. A lot to decide there. Do want to transition on to one of the bigger names that we've heard about finally getting traded. I'm going to be very transparent. I'm going to be very excited not to hear about where Jonathan Kuminga is going to go. I mean, I feel like his name was in trade rumors for the last year and a half to 2 years. For one reason or another. The Atlanta Hawks traded Jonathan Kuminga and Buddy Hield. Excuse me, the Golden State Warriors traded Jonathan Kuminga and Buddy Hield to the Atlanta Hawks for Kristaps Porzingis. Um, Brett, I'm gonna let you take this one because we have conflicting thoughts on this trade and who really wins this one. So, what was your reaction? What was your kind of read on why both of these teams made this move?
Well, like we mentioned earlier, the Warriors were in the honest sweepstake. They had that offer on the table of 4 first round picks, pick swaps, Jonathan Kuminga, Draymond Green, and the Bucks were interested in it. They had a level of interest in those draft picks. It's just the talent that they were getting back. They did not see it as being on the same level as a Giannis trade of what they expected. And then obviously they didn't want to trade Giannis. So the Warriors, their trade talks there with the Bucks didn't escalate to anything. They knew that it wasn't going anywhere by the beginning of the week. And so they started pivoting to Jaren Jackson Jr. when they heard that the Grizzlies were seriously considering trading him. The holdup there, and we're going to discuss it on Clutch Points over the next few days in our intel stories coming after the trade deadline. One thing I heard is that the Warriors were not willing to give up 3 first round picks for him, especially in the future past that 2030 season. They did not want to be locked into that and not be able to have any flexibility to make future trades by going after Jaren Jackson Jr. now. And then there were concerns about that long-term contract. And so the Warriors, they went with a safer route to dump Jonathan Kuminga, Buddy Hield to the Atlanta Hawks, bring in Kristaps Porzingis, who is a player that they have targeted ever since he was made available by the Washington Wizards in 2023 before he went to the Celtics. The Warriors were involved then. They had had discussions with the Celtics this past offseason about Kristaps Porzingis before he was dealt to the Atlanta Hawks. And now they get him in the final year of his contract. And look, Tomer, this is a deal where they address size. They get a good rim protector if he's healthy. And obviously, that's the big if. If he's healthy, he is a good fit for the Warriors. If he's not healthy, he's an expiring contract. It's $30 million that are going to come off their books. They don't have to worry about the toxic situation with Jonathan Kuminga anymore. And so now they can enter the offseason and either extend Kristaps Porzingis on a smaller team-friendly deal, or they can simply let him walk. And they're going to have plenty of cap flexibility to figure out what the next iteration of this team is going to look like. And they also still have all their assets on the table to be able to go back to Giannis if he's available, to go back to Trey Murphy III if he's available from the New Orleans Pelicans, maybe even Michael Porter Jr. once the Nets make him available in the summer. So not what Warriors fans necessarily want to hear because they want to maximize every single last second of Stephen Curry's career. But with Jimmy Butler being out this season, there was just nothing on the market to replace his type of production. They couldn't have made any other move except trading for Giannis to try to salvage this year. And so they're going to go into the rest of the season continuing to give experience to Brandon Pajemski, some of these other younger guys on the roster. I know Will Richard is excited to have more of an elevated role there. And so they're going to be active. This is a team that still expects themselves to be in the playoffs. And we saw it last year, Tamara, that when when Stephen Curry is healthy, this team has a chance to compete for a championship. Obviously, he got hurt in the playoffs, but if he didn't, who knows how far they go. And so that's the same kind of mindset this year. If they can get everybody back healthy for the playoffs and then maybe make a move or two in the buyout market, that's going to be the main goal. But I would keep an eye on them looking for forward depth in this buyout market moving forward.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I understand the flexibility part of it. If you don't end up extending Porzingis or signing Porzingis, you can let him walk. I mean, Porzingis before he missed the last couple weeks has dealt with Achilles tendonitis. He's also dealt with the POTS illness or disorder, whatever you want to call it, which causes rapid heart rate, dizziness. Like I think he was struggling breathing at some point and was very fatigued. This was an illness he dealt with dating back to last year with the Boston Celtics. That for the better part of 3 or 4 months while he was dealing with it, they weren't really exactly sure what it was or what happened with him. Um, and so the Warriors traded their only real asset, in my opinion, in Jonathan Kuminga. Um, you know, Maybe he's not considered an asset. I know that Mike Dunleavy quote about, in order for there to be a demand, there needs to be a demand. Maybe that rings true. But it feels like he was their only real asset towards improving this roster. And if the best they could do was a Kristaps Porzingis who's expiring and not really healthy, albeit when he is healthy, he's very effective and probably fits this Warriors team very, very well. I just think there's so many question marks around him that I don't really understand taking the risk from that perspective. So, look, if Porzingis is healthy, this is obviously a great move for them, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I just think there's so many question marks surrounding his, Achilles injury right now, his actual, health as far as the POTS disease or illness, whatever that's classified as. I think it's an illness. I'm just not sure what the Warriors really do if he's not able to play enough games for them. Like, can they make a playoff push without him?
They can make a push. I don't think that they can win without him. And quite honestly, I don't think that this team is in a position to contend for a championship this year, even if Kristaps Porzingis is healthy, because that wing depth and that forward depth is a concern right now. When they made it clear when they were going to trade Jonathan Kuminga, and Mike Dunleavy was talking about it, the whole sense was they want to replace him with some type of forward, whether it was Andrew Wiggins or Trey Murphy, some guy that could contribute on the wing alongside Jimmy Butler. This was even before his ACL injury. And now with him going down, it's even more vital that they have somebody other than Moses Moody out on the wing. And so that's why they're going to be searching for that forward depth in the buyout market. Chris Boucher, I think, is an interesting name, even though he's more of a big man. You could play him at the four at times, and that's a player that the Warriors not only had early in his career, but he's a player that they continued to show interest in, especially last year before the trade deadline when he was with the Toronto Raptors. So that's a name to keep an eye on. Fans have been talking about Cam Thomas. Is he a Warriors potential target? I wouldn't necessarily say Cam Thomas is on their radar. There's going to be a lot of other contending teams and maybe some teams that are in a little bit of a rebuild that are going to be targeting Cam Thomas, but certainly going to have interest there around the league. Haywood Highsmith is another one of those guys that was bought out or waived by the Brooklyn Nets, and he's going to have plenty of interest from playoff contenders as well. So we'll see what transpires here for the Warriors over the next 24, 48 hours as it pertains to the buyout market, but they're going to be converting Pat Spencer to a standard contract. They still got Brandon Pajemski in their backcourt. That's why I say their number one priority right now is to try to find some forward depth if they truly are going to try to compete for the rest of the season.
Great work as always on the Warriors front, Brett. I want to transition to a team that was very, very active. I don't know if I want to say they won or lost a deadline. I can't really put my finger on that. They were very
Oh,
active
I'll
though.
say it. I'll say it. They lost this trade deadline, but go ahead, Tomer.
I mean, look, in talks that we've had, it feels like the Bulls have simply waited too long to trade some of their pieces, whether it was Nikola Vucevic, whether it was Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, who we thought was a part of their future, with Kobe White, is now on the move as well. I forgot where he went, but he was traded as well. Um, and so I'm just a little intrigued, confused, all the above with the Bulls. Like, what do you kind of make of the Bulls and the moves they make, trading away Kobe White, Nikola Vucevic, Ayo Dosunmu? Like, they were very active this deadline.
I think that every team that made a trade with the Bulls were winners. I think that the Hornets, they got Kobe White, is a fantastic addition next to LaMelo Ball in that backcourt and next to Concanepo, another kind of off guard, on ball, off ball type of shooter. He can do a little bit of everything on offense for them. So I think that's a really good pickup. And I believe that one of their assistant coaches was on Billy Donovan's staff with the Bulls. Drawing a blank on his name, but I know that they have a really good connection as well. So it makes a lot of sense of why they would want Kobe White. And they got him for basically nothing, just some salary dumps and some guys that the Hornets weren't going to hold on to anyways. And then the Boston Celtics, they got Nikola Vucevic. He's been a guy that's been linked to them ever since this past offseason, expiring contract, a veteran big guy, and similar style of play to Kristaps Porzingis. He's just not as lengthy as Porzingis in terms of Porzingis being 7'2". I think Vucevic comes in around 6'11", 6'10", or something like that. So same kind of style. He's going to fit in perfectly. A guy that's going to get plenty of three-point opportunities there. And we know that Joe Mazzulla runs a heavy three-point opportunity system offensively. And so I think that's a great pickup for the Boston Celtics to move Anthony Simons. And the best thing about it is that they still have a trade exception. So they basically extended Anthony Simons' contract into next year without having him on the roster. And now in the offseason, the Celtics could look to make another move to further their championship claim for the 26-27 season. So love that move by the Celtics. The other one you mentioned, Ayo Dosunmu, went to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Love that fit. A great guy that can fit in that system. And he's kind of similar to Nickeil Alexander-Walker in a way where you know what you're going to get from him defensively. He's a three-point shooter. He can be a ball handler next to Anthony Edwards. So another one of those utility guys along with Dante DiVincenzo that can do a little bit of everything for the Timberwolves. But I'm just looking at the Bulls roster right now, Tomer. I don't know what the direction is. And they got some good players. I think Anthony Simons is a really good player. Same with Colin Sexton, Jaden Ivey. Rob Dillingham, we don't know what he can become, but maybe he finds something in Chicago. So they have good players. It's just basically every team gave them something that they didn't need. So they have a bunch of cards. They didn't trade any of them. They have all these expiring salaries. They didn't look to be opportunistic buyers like we thought they would be, whether it was Zion Williamson going after Yves Missi. The prerogative of that front office was to not trade first round picks, obviously not get any first round picks because they didn't for any of those guys, and just stockpile in second round picks. So I don't know at this point, Tomer. We'll see what they do in the offseason. But second round picks for some of these guys that they trade away, I feel like it's just selling very, very low.
Yeah, I mean they were able to get, I believe it was 4 second round picks from Minnesota in the Dosunmu trade for Rob Dillingham. So again, they were able to get something, but just a very confusing deadline. As we said, it feels like they've waited a year or two to just sell on these guys. Kobe White with 2 years probably would have fetched you the first round pick that you wanted for him. Same
And
with Ayo
sorry to cut you
Dosunmu.
off. Sorry to cut you off. The one thing that pops into my mind is Alex Caruso. You could have gotten a first round pick from not only the Golden State Warriors but other teams as well for Alex Caruso, and they didn't do that. They only traded him for Josh Giddey, and now you have Josh Giddey under contract. But what are you doing around him? And that's why I'm just so confused of these
Right.
moves. And that's why you say they wait too long. They have waited too long. They wait till these guys are on expiring salaries, and then they don't have any interest from other teams in giving them any valuable picks, any valuable players.
Yeah, it's very puzzling ordeal going on there in Chicago. I'm not sure how it gets better. Like, because like you said, and I say this respectfully, they got sort of leftovers, the players or the pieces that other teams really didn't find necessary on their franchise or on their team anymore. And so, while those players individually can be good, I'm just not sure again what Chicago's doing, how they feel like they can use those guys. Colin Sexton is expiring. Anthony Simons is expiring. Like these are guys who could help a contending team. Now they're on a team like Chicago that will they keep them? Will they even help? Will they even play that much? Will they? There's so many questions surrounding them. So I'm with you. I'm very confused by the Bulls and what they did this trade deadline. Again, they got some good players, but the direction is just lacking for me. The clarity in the direction. So
And you're not going to be able
yeah,
to use any of those guys either to try to get another trade in the offseason. Simons, $27 million expiring salary. Colin Sexton, $19 million expiring salary. Zach Collins, $18 million expiring salary. Now you're going to have to extend Jaden Ivey or lose him in restricted free agency for nothing. So I don't understand some of these moves. And I think that they're an interesting team to watch on the buyout market now, Tomer, because of all these guards Simons, Giddey, Sexton, Ivey, Trey Jones, Rob Dillingham. That's six guards right there. So I would keep an eye on maybe Colin Sexton being a buyout candidate here for the Bulls. That's not anything reporting, just kind of speculating, putting some dots together here that Colin Sexton, he could wind up being the odd man out. And if the Bulls obviously aren't contending, he may want to just say that he'll take back less money to go to a contender now.
I will say there's some skepticism though with guys on the market. Once they take that minimum deal, I think there is a feeling around the league that kind of resets their value in their market around. And some guys have once they take minimum deals, they are minimum guys. Unfortunately, we've seen that around the league. So also something to watch as teams maybe try to negotiate buyouts and maybe some do it unsuccessfully. So something to monitor there as well. Want to transition to our last topic, and this is more, we're going to discuss a couple teams, a couple players here, maybe answer some questions. But the last big team, the Sacramento Kings, we thought they were a team that would be extremely active, and maybe they were in terms of trying to get deals done, but in the end, they only ended up with trading Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder to the Cleveland Cavaliers. They get back DeAndre Hunter, a solid player. Again, not it's not a bad trade, but like the Bulls, I'm just confused at their direction because they didn't trade Domantas Sabonis. They weren't able to trade DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine or Malik Monk. Some of the guys that they really just have needed to or have been trying to in the last couple months. So just I want to ask you first, what do you just make of the Kings trade deadline? Obviously, we talked about Schroeder, Ellis, and Hunter, but about the Kings just keeping these three or four guys that they've really probably wanted or preferred to move off the roster.
I'll give you one word to describe it, and it's expected. Everything that they did was kind of expected. We knew that they were going to look to get off of some of those long term salaries. They did with Dennis Schroeder. That was not a fit for them, even though they signed him this past offseason. They looked around the market to try to get rid of DeMar DeRozan, Malik Monk, Zach LaVine. There's just no market for those guys. So now DeRozan goes into the offseason. He has, I think it's like $10 million guaranteed, $11 million guaranteed in his deal. He will not be a buyout candidate. And so, do they retain him next season? Do they look to trade him to a team that wants cap relief? I think those are two very valid questions there. And then obviously Zach LaVine, he's going to opt into, I think it's $48 million or something like that, and he's going to play through his contract with the Kings before being expiring contract and expiring salary. And then in 2027, the Kings are going to have $50 million to play with right there in free agency to try to retool their roster. So it's still they're in that rebuilding phase. This is Scott Perry's first year, and obviously we had reported multiple times on those trade talks with the Raptors about Domantas Sabonis and them wanting RJ Barrett. I think that still holds true. Just because they couldn't get a deal before the deadline, Scott Perry and the Kings still have a lot of interest in RJ Barrett. He's going to be on an expiring salary entering the offseason. And then, or heading into next season, he'll be an expiring salary for that 26-27 year. And then obviously, I don't think that the Sabonis interest is going to be going anywhere for the Raptors. I think they're still going to be very interested in him. And it obviously depends on how they play in the playoffs this year because this team ducked below the luxury tax. They did not make a substantial change to their roster, just like head coach there and Scotty Barnes. They did not want to see any changes, as we reported at Clutch Points. They got their wish, and now Bobby Webster is going to see if this team can truly compete. And if they can't, he's going to go out and be aggressive to make moves and make sure this team can.
Yeah, I mean that doesn't even include a guy like Malik Monk who has that multiple. I think it's 3 or 4 years left on his deal. I forgot. I think it's 3 years. Guys that they don't. I think they've struggled finding a suitor for him. DeRozan, excuse me, a guy they probably could have traded shortly after they got him. Now they're gonna end up probably losing him for nothing. It just feels similar to the Bulls, and again, a lack of direction. Maybe selling on guys a little bit too late. I would even say that their package for De'Aaron Fox wasn't great, considering they gave up an all star player in my opinion. So definitely some questionable things there. The one thing they have done well, I would say, is they've drafted well of late. They got Nick Clifford, Maxime Reynaud, and Dylan Cardwell. I believe will be converted to a standard contract at some point because they really like him. He's played well. So the young players, the tools, there's something there. There's definitely something there with those young guys. But the direction, and you mentioned it is Scott Perry's first year, but the direction just seems to be lacking as far as the main guys, the core guys. And so I am curious to see what the Kings really do, um, you know, after striking out significantly, I would say, at this trade deadline and moving some of those parts.
Well, Scott Perry inherited a broken roster, basically. De'Aaron Fox was traded. He had no avenues to move Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan this past offseason. Same thing with Malik Monk. They tried. They tried to move Malik Monk to the Detroit Pistons in a sign and trade for Dennis Schroeder. That did not happen because the Pistons didn't want to take on that type of salary. They had other deals lined up with Duncan Robinson, Karis LeVert, and they did not want to be tied down to Malik Monk. So we'll see what happens here. I think that the Kings are in a little bit better position than the Bulls simply because The Bulls just have all this expiring money, and I don't see any free agents wanting to join that team when they're in full rebuild mode, even though they won't admit that they've been in that mode for the last 20 years. Whereas the Sacramento Kings, they at least have an avenue moving forward. They got Nick Clifford, they have Keegan Murray. You can kind of see the vision a little bit. It's just going to take a little bit of luck in the draft lottery. For their sake, hopefully they get the number one pick. That way they can get either AJ DeBonta or Darren Peterson, one of those guys that can really elevate their roster. And then you can start to see things come together for Scott Perry. But I like Scott Perry. I think he built a really good roster with the Knicks a few years back. I think a lot of people kind of yell at him for that and don't give him the credit that he deserves. I think that he did a good job. And now I think that he's going to do the same thing for the Kings here. I think that we're going to see them make trades and be aggressive in the offseason. And it starts with Domantas Sabonis. I do think that we will maybe see a Sabonis Toronto Raptors deal in the summer near the NBA draft.
Perfect. That's a good wrap on the Kings segment there. Another team I do want to talk about, which you've gotten a lot of questions about, the LA Lakers. A very quiet deadline for them, but they were able to make a move at the last minute, or one of the last hour, I believe, trading Gabe Vincent and I believe it was 2032 second round pick to the Atlanta Hawks for Luke Kennard. You know, I wouldn't necessarily say offense has been the Lakers' problem, but they have been a really poor three-point shooting team. And so they get a sharpshooter in Luke Kennard, one of the best three-point shooters in the league since he's come to the NBA, since he's arrived with the Detroit Pistons. So they get a shooter there. I'm curious to see your thoughts there. I think, you know, while Kennard definitely does help the Lakers offensively, they've also just been a really bad and poor defensive team for the better part of, you know, the last 2 months.
There were just no options for them on the trade market, Tomer. They tried. They talked to the Pelicans multiple times about Herb Jones in the month leading up to the trade deadline. That was just not something that was going to happen. We know that Rob Pelinka and that front office were trying to consolidate draft picks. They were trying to trade their future draft pick to get two or three, much like we saw the Phoenix Suns do last year, to see if there were any moves that they could make around the trade deadline, whether it was an Andrew Wiggins, a Herb Jones, whoever. Just did not materialize. And the biggest thing was they wanted to maintain their cap flexibility heading into this offseason, especially with LeBron James being a free agent, Austin Reeves being a free agent. They can now go out, give Reeves a max level contract, keep him, watch LeBron leave and go somewhere else, and they can start to retool around Luka Doncic. And I would fully expect them to address the center position in the offseason. And now that Daniel Gafford is staying with the Mavericks, I would just keep an eye on that. Him and Yves Missi with the Pelicans. I would say those are probably the two top targets for the Lakers at the center position heading into the offseason.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, not a lot of options as to what they could do. And I'm after last season's blockbuster with Luca, I'm not of the belief that teams are rushing to help Rob Pelinka improve a roster around Luca after that kind of heist of a trade that saw Nico Harrison fired like 7 months later. I just find that really hard to believe. And so, you know, we'll see what the Lakers end up doing this summer. They were able to get Luke Kennard, a guy that they, you know, I'm sure they would want to re-sign given his three-point shooting ability around Luka Doncic and around Austin Reeves. I think that'd be a fantastic little piece there with the Lakers. Another one I did want to talk about. You reported on it for quite some time. Was the New York Knicks' interest in Jose Alvarado? That feel like I felt like you've been reporting that for it feels like months. I want to say. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that always felt like there was some buzz there, but it never really materialized until the last second, until the last hour here before the trade deadline. What was your read on Jose Alvarado getting traded to the Knicks, and the package that went out for him?
Well, he was long their main trade target, and the Knicks were trying to get creative with ways to talk to the Pelicans to take on Gershon Yabusele's contract. They had even offered what they did to the Bulls of restructuring his deal so he doesn't have that player option for next year and he can enter unrestricted free agency. Pelicans wanted no part of that. They just did not want to deal with this for some reason. Very difficult organization to deal with trades from what we've heard. And so the Knicks kind of pivoted and they figured out how can we get an expiring salary that's like Yabusele to make this trade for Alvarado. They went to the Bulls, who were open for business. If you're going to give us any assets whatsoever, we'll do it. They didn't have to sacrifice one draft pick to move Yabusele for Dalen Terry. A great move by Leon Rose in the Knicks front office to be able to do that. And the way they did it was by telling the Bulls that they were going to restructure Yabusele's contract. They're going to take on a $5 million expiring deal, and they won't have to worry about it. And that's why they got rid of Dalen Terry, who is a player the Bulls have been looking to move. And then the Knicks flipped him. They went out, they traded him and 2 second-round picks for Jose Alvarado. That was the asking price, was 2 second-round picks to get Alvarado from the Pelicans. They were not budging at all. They would not do it for one. And so the Knicks get the guy that they ultimately wanted here. Oh, Tomer bleeped out for some reason. So it looks like that the Knicks, they got their guy. They got Jose Alvarado. That's exactly who they wanted. And so now, as the Knicks look ahead to their championship contending status here of what other moves can potentially be made, they're going to be looking to make moves around the edge in the offseason. Whether or not they move on from Karl Anthony Towns, whether or not they move off from Mikal Bridges, really depends on how this team competes for a championship from here on out. And so that's the goal. That's why they traded for Jose Alvarado. And that's ultimately the reason moving forward why the Knicks are in the position that they are. Jose Alvarado is a very good player. They know what they're getting from him. And obviously, with Deuce McBride being out for what seems like the rest of the season, maybe heading into the playoffs, Deuce McBride being out, you now insert Jose Alvarado. You know what you're getting with him on defense. You know what he can provide you with on offense as a 3-point shooter. And so that's ultimately where this deal came to be. But Tomer, do we got you back here?
I don't know. Can you guys hear me?
I think we can. Sounds like it.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the Jose Alvarado, like you mentioned, had been in the works for a while, and so I just, Yabusele felt like the biggest hurdle for them to move off of, and I'm glad they were able to do that because it felt like, that just wasn't a situation that was going to work out for both sides, and so great to see, that just be able to move on from. One other thing that happened pretty late in the trade deadline period. Cam Thomas was waived. I know he was the guy that the Brooklyn Nets were dangling for quite some time. Unsurprisingly, no takers for him after I believe he took the qualifying offer, and has simply just not been a good player for the Brooklyn Nets and what they're trying to build there in Brooklyn. What can you kind of chime in on with regards to Cam Thomas and his future right now?
Yeah, so I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up the show is talk about Cam Thomas in this buyout market. Some of these guys that are going to be available. Cam Thomas, he's going to be pursued by a lot of different teams, and obviously the Bucks we reported were one of those teams that were trying to trade for him before the deadline. The only problem is the Nets were wanting some kind of protected second round pick back for Cam Thomas. The Bucks did not have any second round picks to offer, so I would keep an eye on there of Cam Thomas potentially being a player that Milwaukee targets. But several other teams are going to look to get him on a minimum deal, and they're going to try to get him for a playoff push, whether it's the Houston Rockets or some of these other teams that are atop the West that are just battling for one another. Cam Thomas is a proven scorer off the bench. It's just teams did not want to deal with the headache of him entering free agency and being on a $5-6 million expiring deal. Well, now they have the opportunity to sign him to a minimum contract and not worry about that. So there's going to be interest there. Some of these other guys, Haywood Highsmith, we mentioned earlier, is going to have plenty of suitors on the open market. Chris Paul is another guy that is going to become a free agent, and I'm interested to see what happens with him. One of these teams that needs a guard, and this is not reporting, this is not anything other than speculation, but the Warriors need another ball handler, and they have a history of Chris Paul. Maybe they look to bring him back in, and
You heard it here first.
maybe that's a situation that they look at. But I would think that some contending teams will at least consider Chris Paul, and then obviously the other guy, Lonzo Ball, hitting the open market. I think that there's going to be plenty of suitors for him, and Mike Conley as well is going to hear some noise. But I think that Mike Conley is going to go back to the Timberwolves, which opens the door for one of these guards maybe to go to the Denver Nuggets, whether that's Chris Paul or Lonzo Ball. They're going to look to get another ball handler there, and I think that the Nuggets are going to make a move as well on this buyout market.
Uh, just important to add, if you've watched Cam Thomas in the Brooklyn Nets, again, a very talented scorer, but just I would just compare him maybe to like a black hole offensively, where the ball just doesn't move, it sticks too much, and again, a talented scorer individually. I think one of the better scorers in this league that we've seen. We've seen him go for 40 multiple times in the last several years, or at least 35 plus. I just within a team system, I'm just not sure how much he fits. Um, yeah, I think that about wraps up our trade deadline recap here. Stay tuned for, we're still kind of measuring our plans for the next several weeks here. Obviously, All Star Weekend comes to Los Angeles next week, so we will be taking that off. But we are considering maybe we'll do something after, maybe some buyout market, maybe some more rumor and intel stuff. Um, but yeah, Brett, this has been a fun couple weeks here, leading up to the trade deadline. Any parting message for our fans and some haters?
No, but fun is a an interesting word to talk about here for the trade deadline. Always a very interesting time. Always no sleep, so I'm looking forward to catching up on that this weekend. Catching up on the buyout market, and tomorrow we'll have full stories for you guys of winners and losers. And then stay tuned for next week. We're gonna have plenty of intel coming out from what exactly happened at this trade deadline, from the Lakers to the Warriors to all the honest talk and what everybody needs to know heading into the offseason. So stay tuned for all that intel from myself and Tomer.
As always, that's Brett Siegel, NBA Insider for Clutch Points. Tomer Azarly. Uh, thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate it. And we will see you guys